Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Second Act Show. Yet again, we're back. I'm John Tarnoff.
I'm Carrie Hannon.
And today we are the Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy of Second Act careers.
Go, John.
Darling.
Good one.
And as those of you know, and there's my dog. Sorry about that. As those of you who have checked out the notes know, we have our very special friend and guest, Carl Kurlander, on the show today. And I'm just going to do a quick little rundown on Carl, who is arguably the writer of the ultimate Brat Pack movie of the 1980s, right? San Elmo's Fire, which is actually based on his own true life experience. And he went on to a successful writing career in Hollywood, including in television as a writer, producer on a number of shows, including the classic Saved by the Bell. And that's how Carl and I met, and he'll talk about this and probably has a little bit more detail about how he pitched me something when I was at a studio. We just kind of became friends and stayed in touch. And then Carl is the person who introduced Carrie and me together. Carrie and Carl are schoolmates. So it all kind of comes full circle on the show here today. And with that, here is our good friend, Carl Kurlander.
Welcome to my great therapy session, everybody. So yeah,
that's right. We're gonna to completely deconstruct you in 30 minutes.
and between Carrie and my high school experience, and we went to college together too. Both were kind of very difficult on me socially. I don't know about Carrie. And then, of course, John. When I was I was right around the Brat Pack days in that. So
that's right.
And then to see you guys together, it's funny. I couldn't talk to anyone in high school from what I remembered, and now I've become the great connector in my second act, as you speak.
Interesting how these things work. So let's start off with a little bit of history, and then kind of go into the more thematic questions that we have prepared for you to talk about this transition, because this all started when you left LA to go back to your hometown of Pittsburgh to lecture at the University of Pittsburgh for what was supposed to be a year. And then that all kind of unraveled and led to this jaunt into the second act.
If I can paint a picture, like I used to as a screenwriter, I was living in my dream house with my wife and small daughter above the Sunset Strip, right next to David Schwimmer and all these. Richard Simmons was her back house neighbor, and I was a showrunner on a horrible. It wasn't supposed to be horrible. It was a cross between Baywatch and Saved by the Bell called Malibu CA, and I was the showrunner. But the show was not working, but we wouldn't get canceled. We got 52 episodes. And I had come to feel like Holden Caulfield's older brother, who wrote one good short story and sold out. St. Elmo's Fire was a short story I wrote in college under the pen name C.K. Lander, which you see behind me. And it got me a freak scholarship from Duke to Universal. And the irony is, I knew I was unhappy in that I was, about to turn 40, and in Hollywood, that's about like turning 80 in other countries. But it wasn't that. I was working. I just felt like I had promised myself I was going to do all these things, and I felt like I'd become an unsympathetic character in my own life. So I accidentally sent money back to my old prep school, Shadyside Academy, where Carrie and I went. And I lost my credit card, so I had to email them and say, I got to send you a check. And then they said, we want to come back and teach at Shadyside? So I said, probably not, but we had a small daughter. And my wife said, look, for a year, Shadyside's a beautiful campus. I went to go there, and they wanted me to get up at 7 and teach Beowulf. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to do that. And then somebody at the University of Pittsburgh found out I was in town, and they said, hey, you want to come here and teach screenwriting for a year? And my daughter, she hates when I tell this story, but she was 2, and she liked to dance naked on the coffee table, and we were living above the Sunset Strip. And my wife pointed out that if we stayed in that neighborhood, that would be a profession in a few years. So, but also my wife wanted to move to the Valley, and we were fighting because I felt cool living above the Sunset Strip. And so as a joke, I moved to Pittsburgh for a year. We put our stuff in storage. We never intended to stay. And then weird things happened, one of which is I ended up on Oprah for, of all things, leaving Hollywood and moving to Pittsburgh.
So Carl, what was the scariest thing about making that move? I mean, honestly, you downplay it a little bit, but you were really a big deal. I mean, no kidding.
Yeah, I hate to say it. I know. In retrospect, I still every day say, am I crazy? Is this like a cosmic fool? Or am I a genius? Or maybe certainly somewhere in between. But, it wasn't ever intentional. But what happened was I actually went to Silicon Valley. I was writing a script of Gatsby on the internet. And I went up there and I saw there was a new world coming. And I was like, well, how do I get into this internet stuff? And I wanted to change because I really felt, and that's when I met a guy named Poe Bronson. I ended up in a book called What Should I Do With My Life?
Oh, yeah.
And so Poe followed 1,000 people who changed their lives. And he came to Pittsburgh and he said, I'm not going to profile you. I'm going to profile everyone else, but I don't do writers. So Poe and I brought him to class. He was that year's sexiest writers alive. I didn't even know writers could be sexy. My students were not impressed. But I bought my daughter the small little mouse in Pittsburgh. The thing about living in what's literally the real life Mr. Rogers neighborhood is, unlike LA where no one's happy, I bought my daughter a little rubber mouse and she loved it and it was snowing and she dropped it and the phone rang. Now in LA, if you're holding your daughter and the phone rings, you drop your daughter and grab the phone because it could be your agent and you could end up but who's going to call Pittsburgh? So I put my daughter in, I checked my messages. It's like, this is the producer of the Oprah Winfrey Show. We're doing a show on people who change their lives. We just read the galleys of this book called What Should I Do With My Life? And we think your story is fascinating. And I'm like, my story? I didn't even know it was in the book. And so sure enough, like in the movies, they fly you like the good witches of the Midwest to Chicago. I find myself face to face with Oprah. They have a guy who was per the show, they had what you're doing now. They had a guy who was an attorney who became a baker, and he gave out cake to everyone in the audience. And Oprah said, "Cake love, I'm going to make you rich." And everyone loved the cake. The next one was a surgeon who'd become a shoe designer. She gave out mink slippers, and they're like, "Woo, mink slippers!" And then she goes, "Here's Carl, a Hollywood screenwriter who moved to Pittsburgh to teach." Yeah, nobody said anything. So the weird thing is, you think when you're on Oprah, and I told her I was going to find my voice as a writer, and I was more authentic in Pittsburgh, but I didn't really know. And there's just per this conversation and the big leap, which is, I guess, what you guys had said, because it is scary. In Poe's book, the story I always remember was the guy who was going to design an electric car. So he quit his job, and he spent a year fixing up his garage. He was going to design it. He'd save the money. But at the end of the year, he'd spent so much time cleaning his garage, he ran out of money and he had to take a job again. So I keep wondering, am I that guy? But what happened is a lot of this is intention and taking advantage of opportunity in front of me. After I was on Oprah, everybody's mother started to call me who were big people from Hollywood. My friend Bernie Goldman ran Village Roadshow. Rob Marshall, who directed Chicago, that was nominated for Academy Award, he was from Pittsburgh. Suddenly, Eric Gold, who managed Jim Carrey and Ellen DeGeneres and Vince Vaughn, all these people started calling me and saying, "We think that's interesting. You're in Pittsburgh." And I wrote an article saying our biggest export isn't steel, it's talent. Mm. And Pittsburgh was in real trouble. It had lost all the steel jobs. It needed to reinvent itself as a city. It was almost bankrupt. And so I kind of became this lightning rod. And a woman named Audrey Hillman Fisher, whose father, Henry Hillman, had been the 51% founding investor in Kleiner Perkins and KKR, and was very quiet, but one of the biggest venture capitalists in the world, and really started that. They ended up starting this nonprofit for me to try to help enact this vision of making Pittsburgh an entertainment capital.
So this is really interesting. Let's just jump into this question of mindset shift, because you're going into this thinking you're a writer, you're trying to find your vision as a writer and your voice, and all of a sudden, these external forces are saying, hey, you're at the nexus of a really important opportunity for the city of Pittsburgh, where we're all from, and you should be the figurehead, the spokesperson, the lead guy in this charge. How do you shift from being this kind of writer focused on your page to now standing up in front of people and saying, we need to raise money, we need to educate, we need to motivate kids to be filmmakers, we need to bring production to Pittsburgh, blah, blah.
That's why you were such a good executive, John. You just summarized my story better than I ever could in an hour.
But how did you do it? How did you do it? reach back down inside and say, I'm going to make this shift.
This to this moment. And that's why when you guys called my episode The Big Leap, I hate roller coasters, and every day is a roller coaster. Because I keep trying to finish my memoir, which I came to write, and Poe criticized me because he said he came back to write his memoir and look at all these other things he's doing.
And
but the truth of the matter is, and I'm one chapter away, but but the truth of the matter of what you're saying is, you start to, first of all, everything I wrote in Hollywood, a movie would get made or a TV show would get made. But suddenly there was this idea of changing a bigger thing. And other people, I wasn't alone in this. And constantly the vision got bigger and bigger. And then, suddenly John DeLaverson, who was a Lionsgate executive, came and helped pass the tax credit. Things started to happen. We spent 5 years doing a startup nonprofit, which is killing. The woman I started it with, Ellen White-Skander, who was a brilliant Wall Street attorney, said we would have made more as in a lemonade stand. And because we had billionaires like the Hillmans and the Mellons behind us, we assumed the money would follow. But they wanted to see if we would do things. And so many times we thought about quitting.
Can I jump in for half a second, Carl? I think you're underestimating this unique ability you have to connect people. And I think you learned that maybe in your Hollywood years, but you certainly have this ability as a networker. So you knew when you got there and this invitation came to you, you're like, oh yeah, I know this somebody I went to Shadyside with, or I know somebody at Pitt, or you knew people in both worlds that you were able to bring them together in your sort of low-key way. It wasn't like pressure. I don't know, because I've known you during those years and you're pretty self-deprecating and low-key. And I think that's very appealing to people in a way.
Well, the one thing I liked, that I guess Oprah, if she's still the icon of our world, I tried to be more authentic when I moved back. I mean, John was there. He was working on a studio for Orion, and Mike Medavoy was the big boss. And he's like, we're going to make this movie. We just need Bill Murray. It was about a guy who could talk to babies. And it was my first script called Baby Talk. And, all the other baby movies got made. We should have made that, whatever. But, in Hollywood, everybody's constantly telling you they love you and it's great. But in Pittsburgh, things are a lot more like that. And so I was able to and because it was a nonprofit, it was horrible on my finances. But ultimately, I got to sleep at night because I was trying to do something good for the world. And then other people came along too, because if the vision wasn't right, then this would have died off long ago and I'd be sitting there, writing some other movie. And I will tell two things that I know we were going to talk about. Sorry, there's so much to talk about. But I came back here and 3 things happened that were seminal that I think are good markers for the conversation. One is, sadly, Fred Rogers passed away. I went to school at Shadyside. His son went there. Nobody said, Fred Rogers, what an icon. They would pants him and go, your dad talks to puppets. It wasn't like, but ironically, a lot of people, when I moved back, I met Mr. McFeely and Joanne Rogers and the family. And Fred never did that show to make money. Public television started on the Pitt campus, and he had a bigger vision. And so when I said, well, Mr. Belding would fight with Screech, like, do we make enough money? Is everyone who's making what? And he said, no, it was never about money. And I'm like, really? And the second thing that happened is they had the 50th anniversary of the Salk polio vaccine. And Jonas Salk in Pittsburgh, unlikely place, developed this vaccine with a group of people. And then, frankly, the chancellor didn't give him his institute, so he left Pitt, and no one talked to the people that he had worked with after he left. So my students and I did a documentary on polio, and eventually it took us longer to make the documentary than for him to make the vaccine, which was 6 years. But we got Bill Gates in it, and in the end, the documentary went on the BBC and the Smithsonian Channel. And I started to realize that all these stories, there's another one about Thomas Starzl, who did the liver transplant, were people who did things for a greater good. And when you look at Fred Rogers' legacy, and I think we're all now aware of Jonas Salk's legacy, that he didn't patent the vaccine, and people may not know the name Thomas Starzl, but we just had the movie screen. I have to say this, because I don't know what I've gotten from this journey, but 2 weeks ago, these doctors in Kiev, transplant surgeons, contacted us that they wanted to screen the movie because they needed hope. And they showed us a picture of them screening it. And I was like, oh my God, they say, thank you so much. It showed us we could do the impossible.
Wow.
So, this was not a great monetary move. But the bottom line is, and I still don't know where it goes. The strange thing is people are continuing to build on this vision. And now film is really a factor in the economy here, and there are other things that are going on. But every day, I doubt. And it's so funny, Kiri. If I think I might have talked to you twice in high school and twice at Duke. I was just very shy, but of course that doesn't look like me now. But yeah.
So
Well,
do you think that this was kind of always inside you, and that through these strange, maybe happy accidents, you just kind of evolved into your real best self in this stage, in this second act?
If that's true, I'd like to send you guys a check for therapy, which I've been in most of my life. That would be a great thing to say. I mean, I probably should accept the fact that my mentor, Joel Schumacher, was a great schmoozer, and Tom Mount and Bruce Berman, who were the executives who I interned for that first summer. Um, they kind of taught me that you have to work the room, that you have to make the connections. Hollywood, we were talking about this before, the gig economy was very new. When I went out there, my grandmother said, "What are you going out there? You're crazy. No one makes it in Hollywood." I moved back to Pittsburgh. She said, "What are you coming back here? You're crazy. Go back out there." And so many times I have had to talk to people who run large corporations and banks in Pittsburgh and explain to them that the future is not in getting the steel industry to open up again, no offense, but you need to reinvent yourself. And reinvention is part of the fabric of our culture, particularly our young people who grow up. Most of the jobs they're going to have not been invented yet. There was no Google and Facebook when we started this.
well,
So
Pittsburgh has done an amazing job as a city of reinventing itself. That's for sure. But
I'm
Carl,
holding its feet to the fire. I think Pittsburgh is here, and it should be. 100 years ago, it was a Silicon Valley of, it's where Westinghouse came with the great idea, and young people with the aluminum process came. Now,
yes.
Frankly, it's happy to be a second or third player for Google and Facebook, but only Duolingo by Louis Vuitton. There's only one real hit who went to do. But it needs to invest in new ideas.
Well, have you done anything differently in your second act? Because we know that you have other acts coming up, or we all do. Right?
We hope we do, yeah.
If we think of your second act coming back to Pittsburgh to raise your daughter in a better environment, and John and I would argue following a bit of a moral compass, I think. What would you might have differently?
I would have read your books that you hadn't written yet.
Oh. Good answer.
My wife has pointed out that as a nonprofit, I frequently thought my job was to pay other people first, to make sure things happened. And, it has been, while I was back here, before I left, my wonderful cousin who was a broker bought me 100 shares of Amazon and Berkshire Hathaway. I put my money with a Pittsburgh broker and I didn't pay attention because I was so busy, and we need money to make it through the year. So they would sell some stock, and they ended up, I'm like, wow, how did I take my financial life? Because I was doing the startup, and I've been in startup mode basically. I both teach, which I love, and that's the thing that I can do. It's manageable. I love my students; they give me energy and ideas. But this idea of enacting this vision, which has been both nonprofit and for-profit, and a lot of startup, that's taken its toll. And I wish I would have. When I came back to Pittsburgh, they started calling me a visionary, and I felt it was like being called a leper. I mean, visionary doesn't seem like a job. Then I eventually had to become CEO, and I was not a particularly great CEO because I'm better at vision, connecting. I don't like firing people. And so I'm still trying to figure out, the good news is I'm surrounded by great people. But I wish along the way, I'm not kidding here, Carrie, and I'm trying to sell some books for you, but the truth of the matter is, you need to take care of, I'm not starving, I'm not complaining, but I'm just saying I probably should pay attention to some of the stuff that I did before. And I probably should have set aside more time to write a couple screenplays. I did write some that got some attention, but, enough so that I was still being the artist that I once want to be.
Got it.
I'm waiting for all this to fizzle out. And then I'm like, well, in my retirement, if I make it to my third act, then I'll write the stuff I should have written when I was 25. So.
We lost Carrie. She'll come back on the stream. I wanted to kind of follow up on this for something that, there she is, hold on, that we talked about before, about the kind of unexpected. Hold on a sec. It's hard to be the engineer
Yeah.
and to be
By the way,
host.
to make you feel better and to talk a little bit while you're doing this,
Yeah.
we recently showed the Starzl, the movie about Thomas Starzl called Burden of Genius at Stanford campus, and they had trouble with their tech. I also played in Harvard. I also played the polio movie in the Gates Foundation. In all three places, we had technical problems. I'm like, you're having problems at the Gates Foundation, in Stanford, and at Harvard? So, get a 20-year-old. That's my whole thing. But yeah.
So exactly. So that leads right into my question, which is something you had talked about before, about kind of this hidden benefit of going into this nonprofit world and discovering the opportunity to do these documentaries with your students and all of this intergenerational play, which I would think has been really inspiring.
That has been my secret sauce. That is what I love, because why I didn't just go back to LA after the first year is I remember I wrote a Greetings from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood Christmas letter back to my agent and his wife, who was an executive at ABC. They called and they said, "This is the best thing you've wrote in years." And a lot of it was just about my students and what great ideas they had, because my students taught me a simple thing. In Hollywood, you're always trying to figure out the marketplace and what the kids will think. And they were simple. When we did the 50th anniversary of the Salk vaccine, there's a guy who's a little older than me who was 10 when his father invented the Salk vaccine, named Peter Salk. And my students, he's a nerdy guy who carried a briefcase to school. I love him. And my students go, "He's sexy." I said, "Peter Salk, the dorky guy with the briefcase in school?" And what they meant was they connected to him. I realized that whatever interested my students is what interested. I didn't have to think about it. If it's boring to them, it's boring to an audience. They turned me on to TikTok and Facebook years before anyone else. I made a movie about coming back to Pittsburgh called My Tale Two Cities, where we had Franco Harris and Teresa Heinz Carey. We sang "Won't You Be My Neighbor" from everyone from Broadway to Beverly Hills. And the way we got it out there, and we played 26 cities, is my young students were on Facebook way before anyone else. And so that has been kind of my lifeblood. I was mentored by the people who took me when I was an intern in Hollywood. And I think I naturally have an inclination to try to give them opportunities. But ironically, it's led back to my opportunities, because now I'm talking with some very powerful people in Hollywood who are real visionaries who go, yeah, this new generation, forget movies and TV shows. You got to reinvent everything. They don't watch TV. They saw Netflix going away a while ago. They're like, oh yeah, Netflix is good for now. My students are going to HBO Max or watching TikTok or YouTube. So, it's not cliche. I mean, the thing I guess I would give advice to, or what I like, is the real connections. I hope I can still do this as I get older. When you are around people where you have authentic connections and you're not forcing it. John, you and I met when it was like, hey, you're an executive and I got paid more for the script I wrote for you than I did for St. Elmo's Fire. And I was like, wow. But on the other hand, I had no connection to a guy who thought he could understand babies talking. I was doing it because my agent said, you need to make a living. St. Elmo's was okay, but this is launch your career. And I did have a good career in Hollywood, but it was a career. It wasn't the St. Elmo's Fire. I wrote ironically about a girl from Pittsburgh who was a waitress at the St. Elmo Hotel, where I was a bellhop. But that was all from the heart. It wasn't a career move. And then I ended up having a very nice career, which I still miss. And frankly, I'm more in touch than ever with the people I work with. But I think I'm trying to do things more from the heart. And I think in that way, I'm hoping that the sense of having a happy ending. I mean, if I can get my life out of the cold a little, I'll be happy. Go ahead, Sarah.
You have that moral compass. And I think also, and then I'll toss it back to John, is Carl, the fact is you'd never burned that bridge when you left Hollywood. You've kept that door open. You were always about to go back, right? So you never, really, that chapter, you stayed current with the people there and made new connections. So I think that's critical for people to remember when you're taking a leap from one to the other. You're not saying goodbye completely to what was behind you. You're bringing them along with you in a way.
You guys, it's such a good show you're doing. And I know we only have 5 minutes left. But, that is so true, because what's really important is not only that, a lot of the people who I'm now very close with, I didn't know beforehand, but got introduced to because they all had their mothers in Pittsburgh, and they knew their more authentic selves, and they knew I wasn't out it to make a deal. We were out to do something bigger, and that attracted more people. And you're absolutely right; it's a combination of these. I teach a Pitt in LA semester, which happens to be at Lionsgate in June, and part of that is this crossing over these two cultures. That's where you get to a third thing, that is the revelation. If you just stay in one world and say, forget my old life, I think there's a great loss on that.
Yep.
I think that's a great place to leave it. So,
wow, we got through all this in 26 minutes. That's amazing for considering.
I think that's pretty good.
Well, Carl, it's such a delight to have you join us, because getting to know John has been a real treat for me. And if it wasn't for you making, again, one of these great connections, I mean, you know how to put people together, and it's fun.
Yeah.
Well, if I can leave with a pitch for your guys' show, as we said, the reinvention was so important even before this. And I both thought that it was so excited that both of you had reinvented yourself. And then ultimately, obviously, my movie was about Pittsburgh reinventing itself. But after the pandemic, now you guys look like geniuses. The biggest question is, we need to get a network, and, but who watches TV anyways? They watch it all on these multi-platforms. So the bottom line is, I wish you great luck. I can't wait to hear the more podcasts. And I hope at some point we should get everyone together who's involved in here. I'm sure you have different things, but I'm just so grateful for the voices that you guys together are amplifying.
Well, thank you, Carl. It's been great having you on the show, and maybe we'll have you back again to do another dose of inspiration.
I want it, but on the third act. I'm waiting on the third act.
Thanks. We all have one. Thanks.
Great.
Yeah, we do.
All right. Well, thanks
you.
everybody. And I should make this announcement for our next show. So in 2 weeks, on May 5th, our friend Bradley Sherman, the demographer, is going to join us to talk about our age cohort and all of the work that he's doing. And Carrie, tell us a little bit more about Bradley.
Well, I think Bradley is amazing, and he's right at, right where the population change is coming on. He talks about the super age, how our whole global world is changing and what needs to be done in the workplace. And also, he brings this freshness, this attitude. Again, what we were talking to Carl about a little bit is the intergenerational nature of where the workplace is going and needs to go in the future. Great.
Well, join us then in 2 weeks on May 5th, and there will be an announcement about this in all the places where you found this announcement. And we have a great little comment from Alex Parrish, who's sending you a shout out, Carl. So we will leave it there, and we will see you all on the next show. So thanks for watching, and take care.
Bye, everyone. Take care.
Thank you, guys.